Okay, this is going to be an effective review
Okay,
of the
this is
entire
going to be an
IB
effective
Economics
review of the
HL
entire
syllabus
IB
review, all the
Economics
subjects.
HL
I'm going to
syllabus
be using the
review, all
Oxford
the
IB
subjects.
Diploma
I'm going to be using the Oxford
program
IB
textbook
Diploma
approved by the IB
program
organization. It's a textbook that I
textbook
used
approved by the
in my
IB
studies
organization. It's a
and I
textbook that I
used
used
in my
in my
teaching.
studies.
And I'm just going to be going
my
over the
teaching.
textbook, going over the
And
major
I'm just going to be going
ideas,
over
the
the
major
textbook, going
concepts.
over the major
Okay.
ideas, the major concepts. Okay.
So the foundations of economics is
So
based
the
on the
foundation
foundational
of economics
idea of
is based
scarcity
on the
and
foundational
how people have
idea of scarcity
unlimited
and
wants
how
but
people
limited
have
unlimited
unlimited
wants
wants
but limited resources to satisfy the wants. So a study of economics is all about how do we deal with this limitation, how do we deal with the people's needs, the people's unlimited wants and the limited resources. And this is where choice comes into play, where consumers are seen as rational beings that get to choose which one will maximize their utility and maximize their ultimate happiness through the purchases of a good. Opportunity cost is the idea that if you buy something, then you cannot buy another. Either you spend $5 on this, then you cannot spend $5 on the other thing, and that shows which one or which good you you value more and which good will offer you the most amount of utility. The basic economic problem is scarcity and how people have unlimited wants but limited resources in order to distribute the wants. Therefore, economies, so therefore prices may come into play where people are willing to pay more price for a certain good, then the good will be going to that person because that person wants it more because they're willing or able to pay more of money for it. So the factors of production are land, labor, and capital. These three are factors of production that influences whether or not a good may be produced and by how much a good may be produced. And later in macroeconomics, you can see when economic growth occurs, land, labor, and capital will increase or decrease along with the real GDP, but that's later. Production possibility curve or the production possibility frontier. So what is a diagram with two axes, each with a different product. For example, motor cars and schools. So you can either choose this amount of motor cars when you produce all motor cars but no schools, then you produce this much amount, or you could produce around this much amount of motor cars and this much amount of schools. In that case, you could only produce that much, or you could produce this much schools and zero motor cars. In that case, you produce this much amount of schools. But there's a trade-off between the two, and once again, this is the essential idea of scarcity and essential idea of opportunity cost. You can choose one or the other, but you cannot have both at its maximum prices. And if factors of production are increased, then the whole possibility function will shift outwards. That is what we call economic growth. And within anywhere within the production possibility frontier is it's not the full utilization of resources. Every point on the red curve is the full utilization of resources for the production of any good. However, it may not be the socially optimum production, as we will see later in the market failure section. And this blue line indicates the potential for economic growth that shifts motor cars from or scores from XY to XX to X1.
X to X1.
Utility is the amount of pleasure or amount of usefulness people can receive, and it is the idea that the more expensive a person is willing to pay for something, the higher the utility or perceived value it is to the person. Microeconomics and macroeconomics, that's the difference between macroeconomics concerns the firm or the individual. Macroeconomics concerns the entire economy, including long-term factors. Pause a moment. Okay. And this is a circular flow, so we'll come into play with these all later. So some market structures, we have the free market economics, we have planned economies, which is, for example, a command economy where government goes or protests or has heavy control over the economy, or the free market economy concerns where economic agents such as capital or firms gets to Okay, so these are basically the main concepts of this chapter. And once again, we have Karl Marx. Once again, he's one of the fathers of the economic thought concerning command or command economy, economic. What is this? Economic development as an increase in real GDP. However, it is not just an increase in economic standards. However, it is also an increase in human development index, because a country may be growing economically, but their living standards are not improving. So economic development also considers factors such as healthcare, such as education, such as ability or ease of doing business. These things are all considered within the developing economy. Sustainable development considers development that suits the needs of today, but also keeps in mind the needs of tomorrow. And once again, this is because if you just if you grow the economy by harming the environment, you will soon not have an economy to grow because the environment will be so destroyed. Okay, so this is the possibility frontier. Okay, I believe that's chapter 1. Chapter 2, demand and supply. Let us define a demand. First, demand is the willingness and ability for consumers to buy a certain good or service at a given price. Supply is the willingness and ability for producers to sell their goods at a certain price. Markets is the theory of markets where buyers and sellers come together to carry out economic transactions. Demand is the willingness and ability. Law of demand is as price increases, demand decreases. As price decreases, demand increases. That is because as price decreases, consumers get to buy more. Therefore, consumers want to demand more. As prices decrease, the rival goods will become less appealing. Therefore, consumers will want to buy this good because the prices has decreased. Those are the reasons for the law of demand. Therefore, it is a downward sloping curve. As price decreases, then and the demand increases, then the price will also decrease, or price increase and demand will also decrease. Therefore, it is graphed as such. However, we do not have to do this curve. We just have to do a straight line indicating that there is a relationship between the price and the income. So non-price determinants of demand. So what causes demand? What causes it to go down? Besides this price, once again, there's income. The higher your income is, the more your demand. Normal luxury goods, normal goods, inferior goods, and luxury goods. So if your income goes up, your demand for luxury goods and normal goods will increase. However, your demand for inferior goods will decrease. When your income decreases, your demand for inferior goods will increase. Your demand for lower goods and luxury goods will increase. The price of other products. This is the idea of XCD, and the elasticity of demand. When a substitute's price goes up, then the price will also go up. When the complement's price, when a substitute's price goes up, then the demand for the good will also go up. When a complement's price goes up, then this price, the demand for this product will go down because people will buy less of the complement and hence buy less of the product. Complements, substitutes. Okay, tastes and preferences. As for example, people move away from traditional combustion engines to electric engine. The demand for electric engine cars will increase. Demand for combustion engine cars will decrease. Therefore, the tastes and preferences indicates such a factor. Other factors that causes the role of demand increase the size of the population, and changes in the structure of population, changes in income distribution, changes in government policy. For example, governments want to promote a certain product. For example, like electric cars in China, for example. The distinction between moving along the curve and shifting the demand. So, as you can see, if you move along this curve by increasing the price, the demand decreases. Like, if you move increasing the price, the demand decreases. If you decrease the price, the demand increases. This does not mean you're shifting the curve. When you shift the curve, the entire thing shifts to the right, or the entire thing shifts to the left. It can be either caused by factors such as expansionary consumptionary policies or demand side policies such as cutting taxes, cutting consumer VAT taxes. Linear demand functions. Okay, so this for HR students. If you are given a demand curve with a linear demand such as y equals mx plus b, or y equals a or d, quantity demand equals a minus bp, then you should be able to plug in the numbers and be able to get the quantity demand based on the price level, which is like plugging in p. For example, if P is 10, then 10 multiplied by 10 is 100, 500 minus 100 is 400, therefore here it shows that the quantity demanded will be 400 units when the price is 10. It should be quite straightforward. Likewise, supply also has a similar diagram as such. And you can see the shifting in the demand curves, and that should be quite straightforward as well. The law of supply. The law of supply states that as the price of the product rises, the quantity supplied of the product will usually increase, ceteris paribus. Once again, ceteris paribus is the state that all else is equal, and that states that as the price of a good increases, the suppliers are incentivized to produce more of the good, seeing as how they will be able to increase the income that will be, or the revenue that they will potentially be able to make. However, if the price of a good decreases, then producers are less incentivized to produce such a good, and that's illustrated through this diagram. So also there will be shifts in supply, whether it will be the amount of suppliers in the market, or the incentivization of firms to produce goods, that which will also increase or decrease the supply. The increase or decrease of supply may also be due to government influences. Non-price determinants of supply. So in addition to the price determinants of supply, we also have the cost of factors of production. For example, oil is a major cost of factors of production. If oil prices increase, then firms will be less incentivized to produce again. If oil prices decrease, if it is a major factor in the production, then oil prices may be able to decrease. Once again, remember the factors of production: land, labor, and capital. These three factors are affected to the factors of the subsidies. Then you have to be taking that into considerations. Other prices of other products which existing products, those may also be taken into consideration. The state of technology, once again, if technology increases, then firms will be able to be more effective in the usage of the factors of production. Land, labor, capital usage. If the capital technology increases, then the firms will be able to increase their quantity supply expectations, government interventions. So movements between the inside the supply curve and movements between two supply curves are really different. If you increase the price or decrease the price, then the demand will also change, or the quantity supply will also change. However, that is totally different from increasing or decreasing the supply, either through shutting down existing firms, or cutting down supply taxes, or through the factors of production, the cost of the factors of production, that of which will increase the supply's quantity. So once again, we also have a linear model for the supply function. For example, quantity supply equals 200 plus 400 pre. If P is, for example, 10 again, then we get 200 minus 200 plus negative 4. 200 plus negative 4. 200 plus 400 times 10. That will be 4,000. That will be 4,200. And again, once again, it's the quantity supplied at the price of 10. And if we actually put these two together between the demand and supply, we'll be able to get a diagram. But we're not there yet. Market equilibriums and price mechanisms. Okay, so the concept of equilibrium is when we take quantity supply and quantity demand, or demanded, a demand line and a supply line will pull them together. The point at which they intersect indicates at which point the demanders, the consumers and producers can reach a consensus as of the price and quantity at which to sell a good. When we're above the market equilibrium, there is an excess of supply, therefore you have a surplus. When we are at prices below the market equilibrium, then we have an excess of demand, and there is a shortage of the good. However, both of these have a counteracting forces that will lead eventually to the market equilibrium, where both consumers and suppliers are willing and able to sell the good at such a quantity and at such a price, and be able to afford or willing and able to buy the goods at such a price. So as this indicates, the increase their excess of suppliers in relation to demanders indicates the excess of supply, and the excess of demanders in relation to excess of suppliers the shortage of suppliers will indicate an excess of demand or a shortage. Now, if we increase our demand by shifting the demand outwards, by increasing the quantity demanded, then we will also get an excess of demand with such a diagram, seeing as how the demand has increased, however the supply has not, indicating how with the excess demand there will have a shortage once again, because the demand has increased but the supply has not. So the role of price mechanisms, once again, because the rule of demand and rule of supply both stipulates that at higher prices, producers are incentivized to produce more, while consumers are incentivized to demand less. However, at lower prices, consumers are incentivized to demand more, however producers are incentivized to produce less, and therefore we'll have this kind of cat of mountain game that will eventually lead to an equilibrium price at which both sides agrees to a certain price. The market efficiency once again talks about the equilibrium point at which all parties, or at least both parties, are happy. That's why it is also called the free market equilibrium price. And at this section indicates the consumer surplus, and this indicates the producer surplus. And depending on how steep the curves are, the differences in the triangle size can be different. And once again, consumer surplus may be taken advantage of with price discrimination policies that we will learn in later sections. Okay, the marginal social cost and the marginal social benefit are different, seeing as how just because this quantity of free market equilibrium is most beneficial to you doesn't mean it's most beneficial to society. For example, if cigarette companies are willing and able to sell cigarettes at a really cheap price, it may be very beneficial for both the consumer and the demander, consumer and the producer. However, it may not be in the interest of the society to do such a thing. And once again, we will go over this concept more in the section of market failure. Yeah, so here's a little bit of tricky device. I looked at the past 3 years of paper dreams, and this question appears 2 times, 2 out of the 3 years, which is concerning the free market equilibrium concerning of the they'll give you like demand equation and supply equation, and you're supposed to find your equilibrium. How do you find the equilibrium? You literally do quantity demanded equals quantity supply. So in this case, it will be 2000 minus 200p equals negative 400 plus 400p. In that instance, you'll be able to find the price and the quantity at which the demand and supply are intersected, and we'll be able to stipulate and find the equilibrium point. Once we find equilibrium point, we can also find equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price, and that's basically what is stipulated right here. Yeah. Okay, elasticities. Okay, so elasticities concerns the effect on a single factor when there is a change in price. Okay, so there are three elasticities that we want to be learning. We have price elasticity of demand, we have cross elasticity of demand, and we have incoming elasticity of demand. So the concept of elasticity is measuring how sensitive a certain factor is to changes in the price of another factor. And so okay, so we have price elasticity, we have cross elasticity, and we have incoming elasticity. PED, or price elasticity of demand, is the most straightforward. It is the percentage change in quantity demand of the product divided by the percentage change of the price of the product. So delta percentage quantity demand of the product over delta percentage change in the price of the product. Now let's look at some examples. If the price fallen by 5 cents from the original price of $5, which is a change of 10%, calculate the equation. Okay, so the demand fell from 200,000 to 23,000, 230,000. So in that case, it will be a PED value of negative 1.5. Now, there are two extremes cases where PED could either be totally elastic, meaning that any increases in the price will lead to nobody wanting to demand, any decreases in the price will lead to everybody wanting to buy the product, and any increases in price will lead to nobody wanting to buy the product. And that is the example of perfectly elasticity demand, or a perfectly elastic demand when it comes to PED. Now, perfectly inelastic demand refers to if there's increases in price no matter how high, or there's decreases in demand no matter how little. The demand of consumers will not change at all. So that is the effects of perfectly elastic demand and inelastic demand. And here we illustrate an example: the percentage quantity change in the demand over percentage quantity change in price. So if it's 10% over 20%, that would be 0.5. Once again, that's something like this, where it indicates a percentage change in the quantity of the price. How much would it influence percentage demand? So this will be able to show how responsive consumers are to price changes, and how responsive or how important prices are for the consumers. Okay, and once again, the steeper the curve is, the less elastic it is. The more elastic it is, the more flatter the curve is, the less elastic it is. Concerning the price elasticity of demand, for example, cigarettes are highly elastic because they're really addictive. Goods that are really addictive are not really sensitive to price changes, because if you increase the good of a cigarette, the demand does not exactly fall by a lot because people are addicted to it. Alcohol as well. But if you decrease the price, then people will not really buy a lot more, because those who are addicted will continue buying, but those who really are not just won't buy it. So that will be showing the steepness of the demand curve. Okay. So here is a mathematical explanation of the PED. Okay. Price elasticity, demand, and taxation. Taxation, a government will want to tax goods that are more elastic, that are more inelastic, such as cigarettes, seeing as how the cigarettes will not harm the producers and as much as they harm the consumers. For example, when a good such as a cigarette is taxed, producers are less harmed than consumers are harmed, seeing as how the elasticity is really inelastic. So that's the PED. Now, the next major elasticity concept is the XED, or the cross elasticity of demand. Cross elasticity of demand is calculated with the percentage change in quantity demand over product X over percentage change in the price of product Y. So cross elasticity of demand seeks to measure the percentage change in the quantity demand for one product when another product's price changes. Now, what can XED tell us? First of all, XED can tell us the relationship between the two goods. It can tell us if these two goods are substitutes, complements, or no relationship. And it can also tell us by how much are these two goods related. And I think we have this really handy diagram. Yes, we do. Okay. If it is positive, if the XED figure is positive, then that indicates that they are close substitutes. However, if the XED figure is negative, then that indicates that these two goods are actually close complements. Seeing as how, let us consider this example. Let's consider this example. If, for example, iPhones and iPhone cases, there are complementary goods. If the demand for iPhones increases, then the demand for iPhone cases will be reasonably believed to also increase. If the demand for iPhone decreases, then the demand for iPhone cases will also decrease. Now consider this: if the prices of iPhone increase, according to the law of demand, the demand for iPhones will decrease. If the demand for iPhones decreases, then the demand for a complementary good such as an iPhone case would also decrease. So that makes sense. That's when XCD value comes into play. Now consider this: iPhones and Samsungs, for example, or iPhones and Huawei's, they are considered to be substitute goods. If the price of iPhones decrease, and according to the rule of demand, if the price of iPhone decrease, then the demand for iPhones will increase. If the demand for iPhones increase, then the demand for Xiaomi's will decrease, or the demand for Huawei's will decrease. Now, on the other hand, if the prices of iPhones increase, then it could be reasonably believed that because of the law of demand, that demand for iPhones will also decrease because of the increased prices in iPhones. If there's an increased price in iPhones, it could be reasonably believed that there will be decreased demand in iPhones. If there's a decreased demand in iPhones, there will be an increased demand in a close substitute, which in this case will be Huawei. So XCD shows the value and the relationship between these two goods. Now, if these two goods are unrelated, then the XCD value will be 0 or close to 0. Okay. So that's the XCD, and it's calculated by what we just gone through. Now, our last elasticity concept concerns YED, or income elasticity of demand. Well, we use YED instead of IED because I is used for investment in international economics or macroeconomics, so we use Y instead of I. So YED indicates by how much will a good's demand increase when the person's income increases. So it is calculated by the percentage change in the quantity demand of the product divided by the percentage change of the income of the consumer. And what this seeks to show is that when there is a percentage change increase in the person's income, how much does that affect the demand for the good? So once again, we can show that there's a relationship between this. Now let's keep in mind there are three types of goods. There are inferior goods, normal goods, and superior goods, or luxury goods. Inferior goods refers to goods such as ramen noodles, such as fast food. They're cheap. They're not the best for you, but they're cheap. Normal goods are normal goods. For example, like you go to a nice sit-in restaurant. Luxury goods are like fancy restaurants. So if your income increases, then your demand for normal goods and your demand for luxury goods will increase. That makes sense because you have more disposable income. The law of demand states when you have more income, you'll want to be buying more stuff because of the purchasing power have increased. However, if your income decreases, in this case, that YED will indicate that your demand for luxury goods and normal goods will decrease. However, demand for inferior goods will increase since you always have demand for some goods because people, once again, have unlimited wants and limited resources to pursue those wants. Therefore, as we could indicate from the YED, we could show that the relationship between normal goods, inferior goods, and luxury goods. Now, we have three elasticities of demand. We have only one elasticity of supply, and that's the price elasticity of supply. That indicates how much producers will increase or decrease their production when there is an increase or decrease in the price of a good. So that's calculated. PS is calculated, or PES is calculated by percentage change of quantity supplied in a product divided by the percentage change of the price of the product, and that indicates by how much a supplier will increase or decrease the production when there is an increase or decrease in price of a good. And once again, that's calculated as such. And there are also two examples about perfectly elastic supply, price elasticity of supply, and perfectly inelastic price elasticity of supply, which indicates that whenever there's an increase or decrease in the price, if it is perfectly elastic, then producers will produce infinite amounts of goods or stop producing the goods, or if it's perfectly inelastic, or a producer will not change the production quantity. Now, PS is not as simple. There are a few factors that would limit or cause producers to not be able to produce the goods. For example, how much cost arise from the output when it is increased, the time period that is considered, how long it takes for goods to be built, and the ability of to store stock. For example, if the price of corn increases by a lot, farmers cannot just plant a lot more corn. Of course they can, but it's going to take a long time because it takes a while for corn to grow. So that is an example of how PS may be shown to have limitations and time needed to adjust to the new prices. Price elasticity of supply and the commodities. Once again, that concludes our section at elasticities. Okay, taxes, indirect taxes, subsidies, and price controls. This is going to be interesting. Okay. So what is the tax? What is the subsidy?
So what is the tax? What is the subsidy?
We're going to be talking about indirect taxes mostly right here. So there are two types of taxes. Two types of indirect taxes. There's a specific tax and a percentage tax. A specific tax is called a simple tax. A percentage tax is called an ad volume tax. So for example, this is the supply curve for a product. We could say it is the supply curve for tomatoes. If the government wants to levy a specific tax on the product of tomatoes, then they could just raise the price for all tomatoes sold by $1. Now, a government can also say, $1 is a little bit expensive if you are only selling like $5 worth of tomatoes. How about instead of imposing a direct amount of tax, why don't we levy a percentage tax? So that's what we call an ad volume tax. And an ad volume tax is when a percentage of the goods price is taxed. So whenever a good is more expensive, the tax based on the odd volume quality is going to be bigger. Whenever the price of the good is smaller, then the percentage of the odd volume tax is going to be lesser. Therefore, as we could indicate in this image, that when the supply curve is at its higher quantity or higher prices, then the tax imposed on the supplier is going to be higher. And that's what we call an ad volume tax, where the supply curve plus the tax is much steeper, or at least a little bit steeper than what it would be if it's just a specific tax, where a specific tax is just literally shifting the whole supply curve up by a specific quantity. Okay, and this indicates the producer's revenue. So the blue indicates where the producer's revenue before the tax is imposed. The translucent indicates the producer's revenue after the tax is imposed. So these three, you can able to see the stakeholders. Once again, this is really important when it comes to paper 1, when they will be asking you to identify the stakeholders, identify where or when such a phenomenon occurs, and where and when such a phenomenon occurs, and where such a factor is at play, and illustrate concepts of such a nature. And let me get my pen really fast. Let me write something down. This is quite. There's really not a lot of techniques. You just have to memorize. There's really not a lot of techniques. You just have to memorize how it is like. Yeah. Of how it is like. Yeah. Yeah. Here's the stakeholders. Yeah, so a subsidy could be seen as a reverse tax, where the governments give money to the producers to incentivize them, to make them more comparative, or to make them more having a comparative advantage in the international trade, or to increase their incentives to produce a certain good, to increase their social welfare, to increase the demand for them to produce goods. So that is the purpose of a subsidy. A subsidy could also be a direct subsidy, or based on, for example, the quantity you produce, or it could be a percentage subsidy based on how much you produce. And one of the examples of a subsidy is in the agricultural sector. For example, the U.S. corn sector is heavily subsidized. U.S. corn sector, U.S. milk sector, dairy sector is heavily subsidized by the U.S. government because they want to incentivize farmers to to produce corn, to produce dairy, to produce soybeans. Okay, I do apologize of how fast I'm going because there's a lot of content to cover. I do not want to take too much of your time. I know this is exam season. Okay. All right, maximum price controls. Now, price controls sort of move away from free market capitalism a little bit more to control economies. However, it is also important for us to point this out right now. Okay, price ceilings are the minimum price. Price ceilings are set low. And they indicate. Okay, let me just see right here. Okay, the maximum price. This is the maximum price. This is the price ceiling that indicates the maximum price at which a good may be sold. And when price ceilings are imposed, excess demand will occur because once again, their demand quantity, the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. And we were able to learn how to solve this problem when we come to international trade through the world price. However, we're not at that point yet. Now, if we impose, so remember, tax ceilings are at underneath the equilibrium. So you have to believe this. You have to remember this. Tax ceilings are below the equilibrium price because they are supposed to decrease the maximum legal price at which goods may be able to sold at. For example, rent is an example of price ceilings. Okay. Price floors, on the other hand, are set above the equilibrium point, that of which sets the minimum amount of money goods may be sold at. For example, minimum wages are an example of a price ceiling or a price floor. Okay. So once again, they will shift the demand out, for example, in order to balance out the equilibrium. And when pursuits or price floors are set into motion, then we have market inefficiencies, or what we call market failures, because resources are not allocated effectively within the market. Okay, cost, revenues, and profit. This is going to be a really difficult and kind of a challenging chapter, but I believe this will be beneficial to a lot of you guys. So cost theory in the short run and the long run. In the short run, one factor of production is fixed. This could be either land, labor, or capital. One may be fixed. In the long run, however, all factors of production are variable. Land factors and land, labor, and production, or capital may all be changing in the quantity and the quality. So this is how you differentiate between the short run and differentiate between the short run and the long run. Okay, so before we get into this, we have to understand the rule of diminishing marginal returns. What is the rule of diminishing marginal return? That basically states that there are inputs and outputs. In this example, there will be the quantity of laborers and the total product. So the quantity of laborers, if we increase, if we add more laborers to a factory, it will become more effective, right? If one factory, for example, one factory producing jackets, okay, it needs, if it only has one worker, it's not going to be really effective. The worker has to do a lot of jobs. If we do two workers, then it's going to be a little bit more effective, because once again we have specialization, and that's what Adam Smith basically states: specialization is the mother of all innovation. So we have specialization, and then we have increase in our total production. We have 3, we have 4, we have 5. Until we reach a point where each worker has enough jobs that will meet this maximum product. However, if we add more laborers, would it actually benefit in adding more production? It would not. If we keep adding laborers, at one point the laborers are going to start tripping over each other. They're going to start bumping into each other. They're going to be less effective. So there is an optimal quantity of inputs at which output will be maximized. So this is what we call the law of diminishing marginal returns, where the cost will decrease and then increase once the rule of diminishing marginal returns applies. And this also comes into play when we talk about economies of scale, where the bigger the firm is, the cheaper the production is going to be, because workers can be more specialized. Okay, so let's calculate average product and marginal product. So average product is literally calculated by dividing total product by the quantity of labor, or the output divided by the input. So output divided by input, output divided by input. Okay, marginal product is divided by the total product divided by the quantity of input. So the total product, the change in the total product from 0 to 10, that's a 10. From 0 to 1, that's a 1. So if we divide the change of total products by, so the change of total products divided by the change in variables, or variable, then what we'll get is the marginal product. And as we can see, it increases and then decreases, once again, because the law of diminishing marginal returns. This is a very complicated question. This is a very complicated concept, and I do recommend you guys to, Okay, so as you can see, the quantity of labor factors increases and it plateaus down because of the law of diminishing marginal returns. The marginal product increases at its maximum point and then decreases, and average product increases and decreases. This is because as more and more factory workers are added to the factory floor, it does not just keep making it more productive. Eventually, the productivity is going to slow down. So this is what we call the law of diminishing marginal returns. Yeah, a big difference between economists and accountants is that economists also considers economic cost, which is also counting in opportunity costs. For example, if you could produce this good, or good A, but good B will offer you more profit, then you should produce good B. And by not producing good B, you are losing out on the opportunity cost of good B minus good A. So that is the idea of opportunity cost in relation to economic costs. Short run cost. Okay, let's look at this. So the quantity of labor is the inputs. The total product is the output. Fixed product. Once again, the total fixed cost refers to the cost that the production has to incur, regardless of how many units of production they do. So regardless of if you produce 0 or if you produce 1,000,000 units, you're going to still have to pay 400. And what are some examples of that? That could be, for example, rent. For example, taxes. For example, for example, patents or things like that. Now, total variable cost refers to the cost that increasing your production quantity will entail. For example, labor, the more you produce, the more you need to hire. Or electricity, the more you produce, the more electricity your machines have used. And the total cost is quite straightforward. It is just a total fixed cost plus the total variable cost. So the total fixed cost is the same across all quantities of output, and the total variable cost is increasing as the quantity of labor or the variable quantity is increased. Average fixed cost is when you divide the fixed cost by the variable, I believe. And average variable cost is when you divide the total variable cost by the variable. Average cost is when you divide the total cost by the quantity of the labor. And the marginal cost is the change in average total cost over the change in quantity of labor. And that which will give us the equation of this. So as you can see, the total fixed cost is the same regardless of how many units you produce. The total cost starts at the TFC and it increases. Well, the total variable cost is literally the total cost. Total cost is literally the total variable cost, but instead of starting at 0, where the total variable cost starts, it starts at the total fixed cost and it increases. Because even if you produce 0 units, the total cost is still going to be the total fixed cost. Okay, so once again, here is the cost. The total cost, the total fixed cost is going to decrease because as the production increases, the total fixed cost decreases because you are increasing more. You are producing more. The average total cost, or the ATC, is going to be right here because it is higher than average variable cost, seeing as how the average total cost also considers or also takes into account the average fixed cost. And as the average fixed cost decreases, the distance between the average total cost and the average variable cost decreases. The marginal cost decreases and increases. The marginal cost once again intersects the RTC and ABC at its minimum point. Okay. And the marginal cost, average cost, and average variable cost are intersected at their lowest point. Now, in the short run, we have these what we call the rule of diminishing marginal returns and the economies of scale. However, in the long run, we also have this curve called the LRAC, or the envelope curve, where it encompasses many short run curves to get the long run curve. Okay. Should be quite straightforward. And so what are factors that causes economies of scale? We have specialization, we have division of labor, we have bulk buying of financial economies, we have transportation economies, we have large machines. Large machines are more productive. For example, a firm like this, which is highly mechanized, will be a lot more productive than when people have to manually harvest, not only in the cost of labors, but also in the productivity of harvesting and the productivity of planting. A promotional cost, for example, non-economic competition. This economies of scale are caused by communication problems, alienation, loss of identity, for example, when firm becomes so big that the core competitive advantage is lost. Okay. Here are some notes about cost theory. Okay, revenue theory. Okay, we have total revenues calculated by multiplying price equals quantity. That makes sense. How much you sold multiplied by the price of 1 unit of good. It makes sense that will give us a total revenue. Average revenue is divided by the total revenue divided by the quantity. The total revenue is once again calculated by P multiplied by Q. So the average revenue, you can actually cancel out the Q and get P. So the average revenue is literally the price of the good. And a marginal revenue is the change in total revenue divided by change in quantity. And that makes sense. Just remember, and there we go. That's what it looks like. So if we graph the relationships out, this is what we will get. The total revenue curve increases and then decreases. Why? Because of the rule of diminishing marginal returns. The point at which total revenue decreases is when the marginal revenue goes to 0. Now, when marginal revenue is positive, the PD or the price elasticity of demand is greater than 1. However, when the marginal revenue is lesser than 0, the PD is lesser than 1. I know it's really complicated, but some of these things you just have to memorize. Profit theory. Now, there's what we call the shutdown price, at which the cost exceeds the revenue, at which case you would decrease, or you will have to shut down the firm. When the cost is less than the revenue, or when revenue is greater than cost, then you are making supernormal profits. When cost equals revenue, then you are breaking even. When cost is less, or when cost is more than revenue, then you are going to be losing, and you will eventually need to shut down because you will be losing so much money. That makes sense. So as you can see, these are what it looks like. Okay, let's go into
let's go into
our next section, which is called the theory of the firm. Okay, so what is the theory of the firm all about? The theory of the firm is about market structures and how firms and consumers interact, and what are some characteristics of firms in these four market structures. So we'll be learning the market structures of perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly. So the first one is market as perfect competition. Now, there's a few characteristics of perfect competition we have to go over first. There are infinite amounts of buyers, there are infinite amounts of sellers, there is no price discrimination. In the long run, firms break even. In the short run, firms can make supernormal profits. However, there are no barriers of entry and no barriers of exit. Because there are no barriers of entry and no barriers of exit, when there is supernormal profits, firms or new firms will be incentivized to join the market and producing their goods. Therefore, taking away from, therefore increasing the supply. By increasing the supply, the supernormal profits decrease or eventually break even. And when there is a loss in the market, when there's an economic loss in the profit, economic loss once again doesn't just account for accounting loss, but also accounts for opportunity cost loss. When there is a loss within perfect competition, firms, because of the lack of barriers of exit, they will just leave the market, therefore returning the market back into equilibrium. So these are some characteristics of the perfect competition. Now, how do we use a diagram to illustrate? Now, once again, it's important to take note that perfect competition cannot really exist in the world because of some of the assumptions made. So there's infinite amounts of buyers, infinite amounts of sellers, identical or homogeneous goods. These factors cannot be satisfied and cannot be actually occurring in the real world. Therefore, this is more or less just a thought experiment. And okay, so remember, perfectly competitive firms are price takers. That means they do not get to set their own prices. They do not get to choose at what price they want to sell their goods. Because if they sell their goods above the free market price, then nobody will want to buy because they could just buy from other firms because there's infinite amounts of sellers. Now, however, if they buy below the free market equilibrium price, then everybody will want to buy from them. And then, if everybody wants to buy from them, then all of the firms in the market want to decrease their price. So it's in their interest not to change the price. Also, it is against their incentives to sell below the free market equilibrium because they'll make less money. Okay. So when you want to illustrate, for example, in paper one, when they want to ask you to illustrate a market diagram, what they will do is they will give you two diagrams as such, or you'll have to draw two diagrams as such. This is the industry diagram, and this is the firm diagram. The industry diagram, which includes the supply and demand, will give us the price at which the good is sold at. So you can draw a price, and you can literally draw a line to the other graph. And this other graph represents the price, represents the demand, represents the marginal revenue, represents the average revenue. And if we want to draw it in, this is what we'll get. The marginal cost increases and intersects as such. And we'll have the cost curve, we'll have the average cost. Okay. In the short run, they could be supernormal or abnormal profits. There could also be losses. However, in the long run, these two are balanced out, leaving us at a break-even point. So these blue, okay, so as we can see, the average cost is right here. However, the marginal cost is right here. This difference between the two indicates a supernormal profit. However, right here we can see the cost is greater than the revenue. When the cost is greater than the revenue, then we have an economic loss. When we have an economic loss, because of lack of barriers of exit, the firms will leave the market and eventually the firm will go back to breaking even. So, this is what happens. When there is abnormal profits, firms would join the market to produce more goods. When firms join the market to produce more goods, the supply of the market shifts from supply to supply 1, therefore increasing the supply of the good and pushing, having a downwards pressure on the price of the good. Having a downwards pressure on the price of the good will directly translate to the firm. So when it translates to the firm, the demand will decrease, leading to breaking even and no longer making abnormal profits. Likewise, the same thing also works. The stating also works for when there are losses, economic losses within the firm. Firms will leave the market, leaving what we call leaving the market. Therefore, the supply will decrease. When the supply decreases, then the demand will increase, leading to breaking even once again, where there is no supernormal or subnormal profits.
subnormal profits.
And thus are the main concepts of perfect competition. The next market structure we want to be going over is what we call monopoly. So, characteristics of monopoly: the firm is the market. Okay, there's only one supplier. There are no substitute goods to the good. No substitute goods to the good. The firm has total price setting abilities. When producing at MC equals MR, the firm maximizes its profit. There is long-term supernormal profit. So these are the assumptions made about the monopolistic market structure. And the diagram for the monopolistic. Okay, so here's an example. What gives a monopoly its monopoly power is the barrier of entry. Now, what are some barriers of entry? For example, patents are legal barriers of entry. Economies of scale, for example, if you want to start your electric company, it's going to be really expensive, so the startup cost is going to be really expensive. A monopoly is over a single material. For example, if you want to produce a battery, then you have to have a lot of what's the material? You have lithium, I believe. If you have a total control over lithium, then you cannot produce batteries because you have total control over a certain supply of a product. So these are also common characteristics that causes firms to have monopolistic powers. Okay, so this is what the monopolistic market diagram looks like. We have the marginal revenue, we have the average revenue, which is the demand. The marginal revenue is twice as steep as the average revenue. We have marginal cost intersecting average cost at the lowest point. So, we have to remember this. Marginal cost, MC equals MR, that of which is the point at which, MC equals MR is the point at which profit maximization occurs. And it is makes most sense that firms want to maximize their profits. Some firms want to maximize their sales, some firms want to maximize their revenues, but most firms want to maximize their profits. Okay, so they're produced at the point at which MC equals MR, this point right here. So if you draw a horizontal line from this point up to the demand, so this part is the demand of the price, This part, on the other hand, is the average total cost, or the average cost. And as we can see, the marginal or the average revenue is greater than the average cost, therefore there is an economic profit to be made in such an example. Which as we can see is what we call abnormal profits. Now, unlike perfectly competitive markets, monopolies are not effective or not efficient allocators of resources because there will always be a role for losses. It may be benefiting to the monopoly producers, but it may not be most beneficial to the consumers or to society as a whole. Or if the prices set or with the quantities produced and demanded set. So what we could see, before I move on, there's also something called natural monopolies. This is where monopolies is the best form of market structure for a specific industry. For example, in most cities, the sewers, the electricity, or the water power, or the water company, they are monopolies because it makes the most sense because economies of scale indicates that it makes the most sense for an entire city to be only having one electric provider instead of having two. Seeing as how having multiple electric providers will just make everything messy, you have areas, you have different providers, if you have just so many problems, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So it makes the most sense to have just one monopoly providing water, one monopoly providing gas, one monopoly providing electricity. That makes the most sense because it can take advantage of economies of scale. And often these what we call natural monopolies are heavily regulated by the government, ensuring they do not price gouge or they do not jack up the prices, knowing that these are essentials. Seeing as how the demand and the elasticity for these goods are really high or really low, they're really inelastic. Very high increases in the price of electricity does not directly indicate the price of the demand for electricity will go down by a lot, similar to oil. Monopolistic competition. Okay, some characteristics of monopolistic competition. There are many sellers, there are many buyers. There is some product differentiation. There is some non-price competition. In the long run, there is no supernormal profits. There are no barriers of entry and exit, or little barriers of entry and exit, and therefore, in the long run, there are only breaking even. So to illustrate the monopolistically competitive market, we literally just draw the same diagram as the monopoly. However, we draw the average total cost or average cost at the point at which average cost is equal to the average average revenue as indicated right here, where if we do MC equals MR, just point right here, we draw up a line. Average revenue is equal to average cost, right? So that indicates that at this point, average cost is equal to average revenue, showing that firms are not making a profit, firms are breaking even, they're not making super normal profits, majority are making losses because the lack of barriers of entry, lack of barriers to exit will show that firms will be able to break even in the long run. So this is monopolistic competition, oligopoly. Oligopoly is the hardest.
Oligopoly is the hardest.
Okay, so here's a handy diagram. A perfect competition shows the market share. Monopolies, which is 0% market share because there are infinite amounts of buyers and infinite amounts of sellers. Monopolistic competition has low amounts of sellers. Oligopoly and monopolies. So oligopolies is when there is a few firms producing similar goods. There are different products, however there are close substitutes to one another. And in oligopolies, what we have called is collusion, where firms are incentivized to work together with each other to jack up their prices. For example, toothpaste production. The toothpastes are really they're really substitute goods. They're pretty much all the same. And of course there's some brand loyalty. However, toothpastes are pretty much the same. It is in the oligopoly's favor for them to all work together to jack up the prices. Right? For all the toothpaste production companies to work together to jack up their prices. It is in neither of their favor to decrease their prices, because if, for example, one producer of toothpaste decreases their prices, then all other firms want to decrease their prices in order to remain competitive in the market, because all consumers will just go to that store. It is also not in the advantage of the oligopoly to increase their prices, because if you increase their prices, then no consumer wants to buy from you anymore, and you lose, but the whole market wins. So this is where the idea of game theory comes into play. Do you want to backstab everybody and you potentially win, or do you want to work together and everybody wins? And if you backstab everybody, then you will be able to win a lot more than if you work with everybody else. So this is the idea of oligopolies and collusion and tactics of collusion. However, in most developed countries, producer collusion in jacking up prices is actually highly illegal, and you can get arrested for it. Okay. So assumptions about talk about collusion. So when there is a collusion between the firms, that's when firms all agree to jack up their prices to amount as most desirable to them. Then what happens is that they basically act as a monopoly at that point, because they all work together for the same price. So there's basically no distinction between oligopoly and a monopoly. So what's really interesting and important is that this is what oligopoly diagram looks like if they do not collude. Okay, so as you can see, what we get is the kinked demand curve. You guys making jokes about it. That means the marginal revenue has 3 bends. This bend, this bend, and this bend. The average revenue or the demand has this bend and this bend. When a producer increases their prices to such a point, nobody will match the price increases. However, if the producer decreases their prices at such an amount, producers will immediately decrease their prices as well in order to remain competitive against the other firms. So once again, this is what we call a collusion and a game theory involved in when it comes to oligopolies. And non-price competition is used. Therefore, non-price competition is used in order to compete against one another firms instead of using the price competition. Non-price competition, such as prime example would be how advertisements are used to produce one toothpaste over another, despite them being already similar, or like celebrity endorsements and whatnot. Okay, price discrimination. Price discrimination is when you charge different prices for the same good or services. And a prime example of this would be how movies or movie theaters, they may charge different prices for the same good and services. For example, adults are charged more for a ticket than children are charged, despite them offering the same exact seats, the same exact snacks, like popcorn, for example. And there are 3 types of price discrimination. But in order to
But
in order to talk about price discrimination, we have to talk about what gives price discrimination. In order for firms to price discriminate, they have to be first of all legal. For example, in some countries, most countries, it is illegal to price discriminate based on race or gender. It is also illegal to price discriminate based on other factors. However, you have to be able to divide the market segment into easily identifiable sections. For example, in the movie theaters, it will be children below 12 and children above 12, or people above 12. For example, at buffets, it would be children under a certain height, for example, 130 centimeters or above 130 centimeters or something. So they have to be able to easily segment the population. Another ability is that the firm must be able to stop people from buying the goods at a lower price and then selling it again to higher price people. For example, buying children's, for example, adults buying children tickets to museums. That would be examples of what firms do not want. Yeah. So the three types of price discrimination. The first degree price discrimination is said to take place when each consumer pays exactly the price he or she is prepared to pay. This is when they take advantage of the full examples of the consumer surplus of the demand and supply diagram. Second degree price discrimination is seen through examples of bulk buying. For example, buy two get one free examples. You are price discriminating and changing the prices at which goods and services are charged at. However, it is shady since you are sort of incentivizing people to buy more, or like bulk discounts. Now, the third degree price discrimination is seen when you segment the market into different segments. For example, in an example of movies, you have the adult movies and you have the children movies. They're exactly the same product, which is looking at watching a movie with exactly the same popcorn, exactly the same drinks. However, you are charged at different prices since you are able to break the market segment into different prices or different segments. And once again, this is because students and or children and adults have different price elasticities of demand. Children are more sensitive to prices because they have less disposable income, where adults are less responsive to prices because they have more disposable income, or at least generally. And when you put these two together, firms may be able to charge adults more because they have more money, when they will not be able to charge students as much because students will just choose not to go and to go somewhere else instead. So this is what we call price discrimination. There are three types of price discriminations and the prerequisites that cause price discriminations to occur. Now, market failure. Okay. Now, this is quite a broad topic. Broadly defined as market failure is defined as when the economy allocates resources ineffectively. Okay, when there is ineffective allocation of resources. Now, what is market failure? We can define it as an ineffective or inefficient allocation of resources that is not up to the socially optimal level. Now, there could be undersupply of merit goods, or oversupply of demerit goods, undersupply of public goods, existence of negative externalities, and yes, these all contribute to monopolies or to market failures. Asymmetric information also contributes to market failure because non-price competition factors such as advertisement or brand loyalty may be used to a firm's advantage. And monopoly power is may be described as a market failure because there is ineffective allocations of resources. Okay, types of market failures. There's a lack of public goods. Public goods must be non-rivalry, non-excludable, and non-rivalry means that you cannot stop people from not using it. For example, national defense. You can't stop people from not using it just because you don't pay for taxes. Non-excludable, non-rivalry, that's non-excludable. Non-rivalry means that if I use it, you can also use it. For example, streetlights. If I use streetlights, doesn't mean that streetlights are used up and you cannot use streetlights. And it also has to be non-excludable. That means if I use it, then it doesn't take away from the right for you to use it. Those are what we call public goods. And the lack of a supply of public goods, for example, streetlights, for example, flood barriers. These are are generally provided by the government because it's in everybody's interest for them to exist, but it is in no one party's interest to build such public goods, since it's going to be beneficial to everybody, but nobody will be willing to pay for it because there's the free rider effect, where even if you don't pay for it, you're still going to get the benefit of it. For example, a flood-resistant dam. Undersupply of merit goods such as education and healthcare. If they are undersupplied, that is also a failure, since there is a misallocation or misallocation of resources. Oversupply of demerit goods, for example, cigarettes, alcohol, tobacco, drugs. These are what we call demerit goods. They harm the individual using these goods, and whenever there is an oversupply of these goods, then what we have is a market failure, because these resources are not allocated to the best ability. For example, instead of growing tobacco to oversupply the demerit good market, you could perhaps grow rice instead, or grow a more productive crop. Existence of externalities. So there are what we call positive and negative externalities. Positive externalities are unintended consequences that affect third parties. For example, if I plant a tree produces CO2 for the whole environment. That is a positive externality. If I smoke in public, not only do I harm my own health, I also harm the health of a bystander through secondhand smoke. That is what we call a negative externality. So that is where we have the ideas of marginal social cost and the marginal private cost. So the marginal social cost, if it is higher than the marginal private cost, then that is what we call externality. And if we have a marginal benefit, marginal social cost, marginal private cost. And this is the externality, because society is harmed more than what is just harmed by yourself. If that makes any sense. So yeah. So in order to solve this, what we could do is impose a tax, for example, on cigarettes. We impose a tax on cigarettes to disincentivize by increasing the price because of the law of demand. Consumers will demand less of the good, therefore the tax will be able to decrease the demand for the good, therefore decreasing the marginal social cost, curbing the effects of the negative externality. Okay. So there's also marginal social benefit and marginal private benefits. This is when it comes to demand. If you demand a lot of a good, for example, tobacco, it may be not in the society's benefit for you to do that. Therefore, the government may impose a tax to decrease the demand for tobacco, thereby decreasing the risk for such an example. Where the smoke or the secondhand smoke is an example of negative externalities. Okay. I also want to point out that imperfect information is an example of market failure, because non-price competition is also used. Also, monopolies are examples of market failure, since market failures are also an example of market failure, since monopolies do not have optimal allocation of resources. Now, let us go into macroeconomics, the level of overall economic activity. So, what are the main objectives of macroeconomic goals? Low unemployment, low inflation, market stability, growth, low inflation, economic growth, employment, price stability, or low inflation, external stability, income distribution, or a fair distribution of income. You don't want total inequality. Circular flow of income model. This shows the relationship between the stakeholders within the economy. We have the households, we have the firms, and then later we'll have the government and the foreign sector. As you can see, the firms and households interact in such a manner where the firms offer wages, when the households offer labor, and the firms give back goods and services in return. This is a highly simplified diagram, but we later will have the government involved. Leakages and injections. What we have is the marginal propensity to save and the marginal propensity to consume. For example, every time we receive a paycheck, we will save a little bit of amount, or a lot of amount, depending on the marginal propensity to save, and we will spend the rest. And when we save the money, that is what we call leakage. Now, if we spend our savings, then that is what we call an injection, because we're injecting liquidity into the market. Well, if we take money out of the market, that's what we call a leakage. That is important to take note because the circular flow diagram will indicate the flows of the money. However, if there are leakages within any of these flows, then that will indicate that the circular flow may need more injection or need expansionary fiscal policy to curb the effects of such a phenomenon. Okay, so here's another example of a circular flow. How are national income measured? So the most direct example is the gross domestic product, out of which is calculated by investments plus consumer spending plus government spending plus tax plus exports minus imports. Exports minus imports, because gross domestic product only measures the economic activity within the country. It does not at all measure the economic activity of nationals working abroad. For example, if I am a Chinese working in America, my income or made money from America, that's a bad example. If I am McDonald's, I set up shop in China or Taiwan, if I set up shop in Taiwan, the money I made in Taiwan is not counted to America's gross domestic product, despite McDonald's being an American firm. It's counted to Taiwan's gross domestic product because it is within Taiwan's borders. However, if you are taking a look at the gross national income, or GNI, then that will also indicate that the income of a country outside of the country is also going to be counted in the gross national income. For example, McDonald's abroad is going to be counted to America's GNI, however, not counted to America's GDP. Yes. So nominal and real GDP. So real GDP does not take into account the effects of inflation. However, nominal GDP does take into account of the effects of inflation. Inflation, once again, is really dangerous and can greatly skew the effects of indicators such as the GDP. So that is where we use the GDP deflator, where we take a basket of goods, we divide the goods to see the inflation rate, and then we can see what the real GDP actually is when we take away the effects of inflation. Okay, GDP per capita is straightforward, just dividing the total GDP by the population size to get, because this is to curb the effects of countries with very high populations, however, really little economic activity for GDP. Countries such as Brazil or India, with really big GDP, however, we have a lot of people or a lot of a very big population to curb such. So by doing so, GDP per capita, we're able to show the average economic activity of a person. What are the national income statistics gathered? So here is some examples. It's not really relevant. Okay, limitations of the use of data. So what are some limitations of GDP, GNI, or gross national income? So okay, inaccuracies in recording data. This is really straightforward. For example, when we want to collect data, not necessarily we will collect all of the data. For example, black market data will not be collected. For example, fraud or people who do not want to pay taxes may avoid paying being counted into the gross national gross domestic product calculations. Unrecorded or informal markets, for example, in India, for example, not all goods and services or not all businesses pay taxes. When they do not pay taxes, the firms cannot know if they're making transactions, and therefore is not counted towards the formal market, and therefore not counted to GDP, because only formal markets are counted towards the GDP. As you can see right here, quite a large percentage of many of these countries' economies are considered to be hidden economy, where the GDP is not counted towards it. External cost, once again, does not count. GDP figures does not count into consideration the effects on the environment. That's where the idea of green GDP comes into play, where the effects that GDP or economic growth has on the environment also taken into consideration. Other qualities of life concerns. GDP only concerns the economic activity. It doesn't consider how much the working hours, the competition is like, how the working quality is like. So the GDP also does not indicate the quality of life, the composition of output. Now the green GDP is literally the GDP minus the environmental cost of production, which is used to show the environmental effects of GDP and economic growth. Okay, the business cycle indicates that business will go into boom and bust cycles. But they will first bust and a recover and a boom and a have a recession and have a tough and then have a recovery again. So why does this happen? No economist knows previously when we are in agricultural societies is because of the seasons, because of the weather. However, now the times, even informal markets or even highly advanced economies, the United States suffers from the boom and bust cycles every 10 to 20 years.
Every 10 to 20 years,
So the long-term trend increases the real GDP across time. However, the actual input may change
across time. However, the actual input may
in such a manner. So as the world becomes more interconnected, the recessions or the economic downturns of one country will have greater effects on the recessions and economic downturns of other countries. Okay. Aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is the total demand from all parties for goods and services. Okay, so that could be the government demand, the investment demand, the consumer demand, the export demand for a good within a country for a particular good during a given time period. Now, that could be consumption, that could be investment, that could be government spending, that of course means imports. And changes in aggregate demand, the change in the price level result in the movement and the change in aggregate demand curve from one level of real output to another. The change in any of the components of the aggregate demand will cause a shift in demand. An increase in any components of AD will result in an increase or decrease of the aggregate demand curve to the right of AD1 and AD2. Changes in components of aggregate demand, what changes, what causes the change in the switches in aggregate demand, changes income. Okay? When a country becomes richer, they will demand more. So it is important to think right now, not in the macro or in the micro sense, but in the macro sense. If a whole country becomes richer, they will demand more. Therefore, AD increases. Changes in interest rates. If changes in interest rates decrease, then people want to buy more stuff. Therefore, aggregate demand increases. When interest rates increase, then people want to buy less. Therefore, aggregate demand decreases. Changes in wealth. If people become more wealthy, they will demand more. If people becomes less wealthy, they will demand less. This can be due by the inflation or deflation, depending on how the currency is performing into the international basket of goods. Changes in expectation or consumer confidence. If consumers believe that this commodity will increase in price, they will demand a lot more of it. If they believe it's not, they will demand less of it. Household indebtedness. If households are all indebted, then aggregate demand will decrease because they have to pay back debt. However, if households are not indebted, they will demand more because they want to buy more stuff. Makes sense. So this is aggregate demand, similar to microeconomics demand, also slopes downwards. So what causes changes in government spending? Once again, we have the factors or the objectives, the macroeconomic objectives. The government may want to stimulate the consumption, increase production, or more importantly, governments will want to ensure the low unemployment. So this is why governments may spend more money in order to have expansionary monetary fiscal policies, but they may want to contract or have contractionary monetary policies or fiscal policies in order to ensure that inflation does not get too out of hand. So this is aggregate demand. Okay, monetary and fiscal policies. Let's think about this. Fiscal policies refers to changes in the government's policies concerning money. This could be taxes. This could be subsidies. This could be government handouts. This could be government spending, government wages to federal workers. What is monetary policy? Monetary policies are policies concerning money set by the central bank, that of which is most primarily, that which primarily is concerning interest rates. So increases in interest rates will increases in contraction in fiscal policy and decreases aggregate demand. Well, decreases in interest rates will increase aggregate demand because it is an expansionary fiscal policy. However, when there is an increase in interest rates for extended periods of time, then what will usually happen is inflation will increase. Inflation will increase, leading to one of the macroeconomic objectives being lost. Okay, aggregate supply. Aggregate supply is broken down into short and the long run. Aggregate supply refers to the total demand of a good and service within the economy. That of which is the definition for aggregate supply. So aggregate supply shifts upwards in the short run. aggregate supply might decrease or increase in the short run. Now, once again, the short run and the long run for aggregate supply is a little bit different when it's Now, because it is believed that in the long run, all factors of production will be used into play. Therefore, in the long run, the aggregate supply is just one straight line because they are at YFE, or Y at the point, real output at a point of full employment. Now, one thing I forgot to mention, within the macroeconomic diagrams, when you want to draw the aggregate supply, aggregate demand, the y-axis is referring to the aggregate price level or the average price level, or the x-axis refers to the real output or the real GDP output. So yeah, in the long run, we have the neoclassical perspective and the Keynesian perspective. The Keynesian perspective is that because there are sticky wages, because there are stingencies or limitations on how flexible prices can be. In the long run, this is what the average supply is going to look like. It's going to have a straight line, and it's going to have a horizontal straight line and a horizontal vertical line. However, neoclassicals believe that it doesn't matter; it's just all a straight line. And once again, John Maynard Keynes came and offered this new perspective after witnessing the events of the Great Depression. Now, what does a shift in the aggregate supply actually mean? So, for example, what if we shift LRAS from 1 to 2? What if we shift LRAS from 1 to 2 for both the Keynesian and neoclassical perspective? What does that mean? That basically means that the factors of production, the production possibility frontier has improved. Now, what does that mean? That means that either production has land, labor, of capital has increased. Land increased production potentially because of deforestation, potentially because of land reclamation projects such as going on in Singapore, going on in Hong Kong, or going on in Taiwan. Or production also mostly because of technology. When technology increases, then the effectiveness of labor increases, and therefore shifts in the long run aggregate supply will also increase. Now, keep in mind the definition that in the long run, all factors of production are variable. However, in the short run, all but one factors of production are variable. So that's something that you may want to keep in mind. All right, that's aggregate supply. Okay, macroeconomic equilibrium makes sense. Macroeconomic equilibrium makes sense, basically the same as microeconomic equilibrium, when we take the macroeconomic supply plus aggregate supply plus aggregate demand, we add it together, and we could find the aggregate demand and supply amount, or quantity, and the real output at which the price exists. And shifts in the long run, short run makes sense. Okay, now if the aggregate demand is less than the long run aggregate supply, then we have deflationary gap. If aggregate demand is greater than long run aggregate supply, then we have an inflationary gap. Now, the Keynesian perspective is that we are not producing at the full competitive or the full possibility frontier, production possibility frontier. Okay. However, if aggregate demand is greater or increases beyond long run aggregate supply, then what we get is an inflationary gap. Okay. Demand side policies is so we have two side policies. We have the demand side policies and the supply side policies. The demand side policies stimulate the consumers and increases their ability and willingness to consume. While supply side policies benefits the producers, such as a decrease in taxes, such as a subsidy that increases the ability to produce, and it incentivizes producers to produce more. Those are what we call producers and demand side and production side policies. Changes in long run aggregate supply. So that's once again is caused by economic growth. Not economic development. There's a big difference between economic development and economic growth. It's economic growth that influences the long run supply. The multiplier effect. Now, this is what we call the Keynesian multiplier effect. For example, let me give you an illustration. If the government spends $100 billion, does the effect on the economy only last $1 billion? And the answer is no. When the government spends $1 billion, people, for example, contractors or federal workers, receive the money. Yes, they pay some amount of taxes. Yes, they save a bit of amount. But a lot of the money is going to be spent again. So the government's spending becomes somebody else's spending. for example, federal workers' spending, and the spending then becomes somebody else's income, then becomes somebody else's spending, and as you can see, it goes on and on and on, it goes on and on and on. Now, when does it stop, or is it just infinite? Of course it stops, because this is based on the marginal propensity to save and the marginal propensity to consume. Now, it sounds really difficult, but the marginal propensity to save basically means by how many percentage or how much do people save, and how much do they consume. And the marginal propensity to save plus the marginal propensity to consume should equal 100%. Now, how do we calculate that? It's quite straightforward. We do that, the Keynesian multiplier is calculated by 1 over 1 over marginal propensity to consume, that of which we have to multiply by the amount that government spends, or the amount of the initial stimulus, that of which will give us the effects of the multiplier effect, or the effects of the actual government spending. Low unemployment. Once again, low unemployment is one of the primary. Low unemployment is one of the primary. What is it called? Well, one of the primary macroeconomic objectives that governments want to pursue. Governments want to pursue low inflation, low unemployment, economic growth, equal distribution of income, and macroeconomic and stability within the economy. So low unemployment can be a So what is the definition of unemployment? We have to define that term first. Unemployment refers to people willing and able to seek jobs, however unable to find them. Okay, so there are a few criteria. You have to be of working age, you have to be actively seeking a job, and being unable to find it. These 3 criteria make you unemployed. If you are not of working age, however, you are seeking jobs, but you cannot find it, then you are not unemployed, because you cannot legally work. If you are of legal age, but you are not searching for a job, but you do not have a job, then you are not unemployed, because you are not actively searching. So, right off the bat, you can sort of see some problems with the figures of unemployment, because what we have is what we call disgruntled unemployment, where after a long time of being unemployed, people will stop searching for jobs, and once they stop searching for jobs, they are no longer counted as unemployed. Another problem with unemployment, or measuring unemployment, is partially unemployed, is partially employed. For example, if you work part-time or if you work full-time, you're all counted as employed, regardless of how many hours you work. You can literally work 1 hour a day and make minimum wage, but still counted as fully employed. So we can see some problems with unemployment, or employment, as a measure of yeah. And we also have the hidden unemployment. So yeah. Distribution of unemployment. We have some characteristics such as geographical disparities, age disparities, ethnic differences, gender disparities. Okay, the cause of unemployment. The cause of unemployment are unemployment people themselves. They suffer because they do not have income, or they do not have productive thing to do. Cost of unemployment to society. Society does not reach a maximum, or they have market failure because resources are not allocated most effectively. And I know it's kind of wrong to call people resources, but I mean, to economists, people are just resources. And people may turn to homelessness, poverty, crime, or vandalism when you don't have a job. I mean, that's debatable, but yeah. Okay, cost of unemployment on the economy as a whole. Production will decrease because there's less workers than they could potentially be. What are the main factors affecting the level of unemployment? Which is the ability, willingness, and ability for firms to employ. And one of the arguments against a higher minimum wage, for example, $15 minimum wage in the U.S., as some people want to propose, will show that higher wages may lead to unemployment. Of course, the economics of this is beyond the scope of this curriculum so far, but you can see that the factor for unemployment is because firms are not able to buy or achieve employment. Now, there are 4 types of unemployment. There is what we call frictional unemployment, structural unemployment, and cyclical unemployment. Where is that? So this is quite fluffy.
So this is quite fluffy.
Yeah. So frictional unemployment is quite
So
straightforward.
frictional
It's the
unemployment is
between
quite
jobs.
straightforward.
For
It's
example,
the unemployment between
when a
jobs.
graduate
For
or
example,
when a university graduate from
When
school,
a university graduate from school.
between the time they graduate and between the time they find a job, that's what we call frictional unemployment. Structural unemployment is changes in the economy that indicates a change in the types of workers demanded. For example, when a type of job is no longer needed. When the type of job is no longer needed, for example, taxi drivers may no longer needed when automated drivers come out. Then that basically means that then that shows that unemployment may be So structural unemployment and frictional unemployment is actually okay for the economy. It's not bad for the economy. However, cyclical unemployment is actually really bad for the economy. Seeing as how a cyclical unemployment is caused by when producers when there is a lack of demand in the economy and producers have to lay off employees because there's not enough people buying their goods. Now that's really bad for not only the employees and the economy, because when the employers lay off the employees have no longer have income. When employees don't have income, they demand less, and when they demand less, the other firms receive less income, and this becomes a positive feedback loop of negative events. That of which, in many ways, is similar to what happened in the Great Depression in the 1920s and 30s. Excuse me, I swear I don't have COVID-19. Frictional unemployment, which is okay.
Frictional unemployment,
between
which
jobs.
is okay.
Seasonal unemployment is okay for the economy as a whole, but it's not for the person, perhaps. Structural unemployment is where there's changes. For example, automation makes jobs redundant, although it may be harmful or really tragic for the employer, for the unemployed. It may actually be good for the entire economy because it makes the whole economy more effective, because resources are allocated at the more effective locations, and that's actually okay. And lastly, we have what we call the cyclical unemployment, which is really bad for not only producers but also the people that are unemployed. So yeah, so that's the section about unemployment. Now let's talk about low and stable rates of inflation. Deflation and deflation. So inflation is when the price of goods increases. When the price of goods and services increases year over year. Disinflation is when the rate of inflation decreases. However, you are still experiencing inflation. For example, if inflation decreases from 6% to 4%, you are still having inflation, but this is what we call disinflation. No, deflation is experienced when there is negative inflation. For example, when the prices of goods actually decrease. And so for example, if we have negative 2% inflation, now that is what we call 2% inflation. That is year over year. The goods price decreases by 2%. Now, how is inflation measured? That is measured through the basket of goods. So, for example, the basket of goods will measure what are the average prices of goods for water, what are the average prices of goods for food, what are average prices of goods for transportation, and this year, and then we measure another year, and then if it increases, then we have inflation, and we can see that how much has inflation taken place. Now, there are two major types of inflation. There is cost push inflation and demand pull inflation. Cost push inflation is when producers have increased cost of production. For example, if raw materials, if labor costs, if capital costs increases, then firms are incentivized to increase their costs in order to cover this increase in the cost of production. However, if there is a decrease in this is what we call cost push production. For example, if the price of gasoline increases, and gasoline is a major part in the production of your good, then you may have to increase your price because of the increased price in gasoline, and that is what we call a cost push inflation. Now, demand pull inflation is when we call when a lot of people demand a good, and because a lot of people demand the same good, producers are willing able to increase the price in order to give the goods to the people that demand it more, and willing and able to spend a higher amount of money to buy the good. And that makes a lot of sense. That is what we call the price push and demand pull inflation. Yeah, reducing inflation. Now, how do countries actually reduce inflation? How do countries do? They could do contractionary fiscal policies or contractionary monetary policies. Contractionary fiscal policies refers to increasing taxes, decreasing subsidies, decreasing federal employees' compensation. This, of course, is really unpopular, but it may be beneficial for the economy if decreasing inflation or is really important. On the other hand, fiscal policies may also be really important when it comes to managing inflation, such as increasing the interest rate in order to ensure that people are not recklessly borrowing money or in the bubble, thereby ensuring that prices may be more stable and inflation may not go out of hand. Now, what is stagflation? Stagflation is when there is high inflation and high unemployment. Is that true? Okay, high inflation, high employment, and low interest rates. Another thing is, why is this inflation? Why is deflation bad? Think about this. You may think that year over year, if the value of my money goes up, then that's pretty good. Why is deflation bad? Now, deflation is actually bad, and for a few main reasons. First of all, if consumers anticipate that the buying power of their money is going to increase year after year, right? If the buying power of consumers' money is going to increase year after year, then what incentivizes them to go out and spend money? Nothing. Why should they go out and spend money when they know the money is going to be worth a lot more, perhaps next year or the year after the next? Why should they spend money if the money's going to be worth more? And that kind of makes sense. So disinflation or deflation is actually bad for the economy for such a man.
Deflation is actually bad for the economy for such a man. Okay.
Okay, calculating inflation.
Okay,
so
calculating
we can look at
inflation.
So here's the baskets of goods and services. We have to calculate the average index of this year. You have to calculate the average index of another year. And you have to ensure how do you calculate the percentage change. Once again, the formula for calculating percentage change is mu minus O divided by O multiplied by 100. So we do 100, 1 to 1 divided 1 to 1 minus 118 divided by 1 to 1. Mu minus O divided by O. Yeah, divided by 118 multiplied by 100, and that will give us the percentage of inflation. As indicated right here. Okay. Mu minus O divided by O.
Okay. Mu minus O divided by O. Okay.
So that's calculating. Okay, Phillips curve. What is the Phillips curve? The Phillips curve seeks to illustrate the relationship between unemployment and rates of the change in real wages. Now, there's another Phillips curve about unemployment and inflation rate. So the higher the unemployment, the lower the inflation. The lower the unemployment, the higher the inflation rate. Why is that? Because the lower the employment rate, the lower the unemployment, the more people are employed, the more people get to spend money. The more people get to spend money, the higher there is a cost push pressure on inflation, and therefore inflation rises. Okay, and there is that as well. Okay. Economic growth. What is economic growth? Economic growth is when the LRAS increases, the long run aggregate supply increases. That is when land, labor, when the factors of production increases, in quality or in quantity. For example, if land increases in quantity, then that means land reclamation, or deforestation that actually receives productive land, or when land becomes more valuable. For example, instead of having a low technology agrarian agriculture, we have mechanized agriculture, that which increases the productivity of land and increases the productivity of the country, thereby increasing the economic growth. Therefore, the production possibility curve is used to illustrate this. For example, as you can see, the production possibility curve may be right here from A to B. That is increase in the usage of the PPC, that which shows an economic growth and using production as more closely resembling to the maximum ability. Now, what is economic growth? Economic growth is when the production possibility curve actually increases. Okay, actually expands out. And that's really important for us to illustrate, seeing as how production possibly curve will increase, and it will show it will show that land, labor, or capital is being used at a more effective level. Now, it's important to take note that increases in the increases in economic development, increases in economic growth does not directly indicate increases in economic development at all times. Okay. Equality and distribution of income. Once again, remember one of the macroeconomic objectives is the equal and fair distribution of income. So distinguish between equality, equity, and equality, absolute poverty, relative poverty. Okay. So how do we measure inequality? This is what we call the Gini coefficient. So this is the line of absolute inequality, where 20% of the population has 20% of the economy, 60% of the population has 60% of the economy, 100% of the population has 100% of the wealth. What will be a perfectly equal society will be a straight line like this. However, almost no countries are like that. In fact, I'll go as far as to say no country is like that. And a perfectly unequal country will be where nobody, 20%, everybody has 0% of the wealth, and only 1% has 100%. 1% of the population has 100% of the wealth, and that would be what we call a perfectly unequal a country. So this was what we call Brazil and Croatia. The bigger or the further away the country is from the line of absolute equality, the more unequal it is. Okay, so what are some curbs that countries can do to help the effects of inequality? Taxes are an example. Direct taxes and indirect taxes. Direct taxes are more effective. For example, they have different tax brackets. Or if you earn more, you have to be taxed at a higher tax bracket. And this is an example of governments redistributing income. Government assistance programs such as unemployment benefits are also an example of government assisting in the welfare of their citizens. Yes. Regressive tax rate is when everybody is taxed at the same amount, or a percentage tax. It doesn't matter if you make $200,000 a year or if you make $20,000 a year. All going to be taxed at a 40% rate. That's what we call a regressive tax. A proportional tax or a progressive tax is what we call a percentage increase tax. Okay. Government expenditures provide essential goods and services, such as food stamps in America. Okay. Now, I believe that concludes our section for macroeconomics. Let's move into international economics. Why do countries trade? Now, there's the three reasons why countries trade. That is to increase the variety of products in their domestic economy. That is to take advantage of comparative and absolute advantage. That is to take advantage of lower prices. That is to take advantage of the gains in trade. That is to take advantage of the specialization and division of labor. That is to take advantage of opportunity costs and economies of scale. Because low prices, greater choices for consumers, or difference in resources. For example, some countries may have a lot of iron but have no coal. So they trade with each other, and both countries have now coal and iron, which is a win-win for both parties. Economies of scale, for example, it is very impractical for every country to have an iPhone factory producing iPhones. It's really impractical. So it would be more practical for iPhones to all be produced in China or in Taiwan. And it would make a lot more economic sense because of the economies of scale that would be involved. Instead of having factories all around the world, we just have to have one factory that imports to all other countries. Increased competition. When there's international trade, firms are incentivized to be more effective in order to remain in business. Because if they are not effective, then a competition will come and they will lose out on the ability to sell. And there's no big problem with that. That means that the economy is being a lot more. The economy is being a lot more allocatively efficient in the way they allocate resources if ineffective firms are shut down. More efficient allocation of resources, that's literally what I just said. Source of foreign exchange. Once again, countries will want to have foreign assets or foreign currencies in their official government, in the official country reserves in order to mitigate the risks of their and to act as to back up their own currency, also to give the country legitimacy in setting up international trade. They will want to have foreign currencies, and the way to do that is through foreign trade. comparative advantage theory and absolute advantage theory.
Advantage
okay, so absolute advantage theory is when you have when one country has a cheaper ability to produce goods and services, then they shall produce that goods and services and trade with a country is more expensive to produce a good. For example, if I could produce iPhones at $900 per piece, but you could produce iPhones at $800 per piece, then you should produce iPhones and I should not produce iPhones and we should trade. On the other hand, a comparative advantage is when the opportunity cost of me producing iPhones is lower than the opportunity cost for you producing iPhones, and therefore I should produce iPhones. So you have to know the calculations that the opportunity cost is just dividing one by the other, while the absolute advantage is dividing is to see which country can produce the goods at a cheaper price and going with which other country. Now, if you're asked to draw what it looks like, then this is what it will look like.
It would look like.
And international organizations such as the World Trade Organization will help facilitate trade deals bilateral and multilateral to help to mitigate or to solve trade disputes between countries. So those are the objectives of the World Trade Organization. Free trade and protectionism. So now that we have established the benefits and reasons or rationale behind one country's trade, it is important for us to understand why do countries not want to trade? So free trade is when countries can freely import and export goods between countries without any restriction from the government, either through import taxes such as tariffs, import quotas, or any restrictions that will restrict a country's or firm's ability to trade. So arguments for protectionism, there's actually quite a bit of arguments for protectionism, that of which includes the following. To protect infant or sunrise industries, for example. For example, if America already has a really good 5G, for example, China already has a really good 5G network. America, in order to protect the 5G network from the influences of Chinese 5G networks, America bans Chinese 5G network entering the country, so that American 5G network companies can actually American 5G technology before China comes in. Protecting economy for low-cost labor. America versus Mexico, for example. Mexico has much lower cost of labor, and America fears that if we have free trade, such as the North American Free Trade Agreement, then Mexico will take away all the jobs. Now, is there merit to it? Perhaps. No. Is there merit to it? Perhaps. Clear arguments against it? Of course there is. To avoid risk of over-specialization, for example, if in an overly dependent economy between the world, if one supply chain is disrupted, then the whole thing gets detrimented. So if one country becomes unstable and unable to produce a good, you do not want to be over-reliant on one country to supply all of its goods. Therefore, you also kind of want to, diversify a bit. Strategic reasons. For example, America often puts tariffs upon Iranian products because of the Iranian nuclear program, and for geopolitical reasons or for political reasons, America may impose trade restrictions on countries such as North Korea or Iran. For strategic or diplomatic reasons, to prevent dumping, or once again to prevent foreign firms from taking all advantage of the openness of the economy and to take advantage of the consumers by setting their prices below the cost of production, therefore driving out domestic producers. Yes. And another reason for protectionist policies is to protect product standards. For example, if we believe that Australian agricultural products is better than Indonesian agricultural products because of the standard and non-use of pesticides, then perhaps people would refuse to have imports from certain countries because of their standards or because of their something you do not want. To raise government revenue. To raise taxes because of import taxes, such as the tariff would raise government revenue, or to correct the balance of payment deficits to decrease the import deficit between countries' trade. Now, arguments against protectionism is once again arguments for free trade, as we outlined in the previous section. So this is the graph or the diagram for trade. There is a domestic supply and a domestic demand. Therefore, this is the domestic price and this is the domestic quantity. However, when we trade with other countries, countries will import the same exact good or a similar comparable good at a lower price, at the world price or the supply world, that of which is lower than the domestic price. So then at this section we will have a surplus of demand, and the surplus of demand is going to be met by the world supply. So the quantity between Q1 and Q2 is going to be the quantity of imports. And we're going to see how tariffs. Okay, here's a tariff. Tariff is a form of protectionist policy, that of which refuses or sets of imports tax. DNC refers to government revenue from the tax. F and C refers to welfare loss imposed by the tax. So instead of having Q1 to Q2 as the import quantity, now we have Q3 to Q4 as the import quantity, and this is when we shift the entire world cost, or the price of the good for the world, up by 1 unit, or by however much the tariff is costing. Okay, a subsidy is when the domestic production is subsidizes, and it's really similar to what we learned just then in the macroeconomics, where we shift the entire supply curve to the right. Therefore, instead of importing the quantity of Q1 to Q2, we import the quantity of Q3 to Q2, because there is a decrease in the need to import, since there is an increase in the ability for the domestic country to produce the good. Now, a quota is a physical limit on the legal imports that can enter the country. So a quota also shifts the entire supply curve to the right, that of which decreases the ability for firms to import goods from Q1 to Q2 to now Q3 to Q2, that of which limits the ability for firms to for foreign firms to import their goods. Now, quotas do not have any positive benefits on the government directly, as opposed to tariffs, where tariffs will also have direct implications to the government, where governments will also receive tax money. Yes, and this is where we have to calculate. Quite straightforward. Exchange rates. Now let us go over exchange rates. Okay, so there are a few exchange rate systems. There's a free floating exchange rate system, the managed exchange rate system, and what we call the pegged exchange rate. The free floating exchange rate system is when the value of the currency is determined solely by the demand and supply of the currency traded. Managed exchange rate is when the currency's value is allowed to float within a certain range. However, if the value of the currency exceeds a certain range, then the government will, or the central bank will intervene to either increase the value or decrease the value of the currency, in order to ensure that the currency is not is still within the set boundary of exchange rates. And a pegged exchange rate is when there is an official rate between the exchange of one currency and the exchange of another currency, that of which is seen. For example, between the Hong Kong dollar and the American dollar. Yeah, that is an example. That is an example. So a floating rate exchange system. So at the x-axis we have the quantity of $1 of US dollars. On the y-axis we have the price of US dollars in euros. And on the xy-axis we have the supply of US dollars in the US as the supply, and the demand of US dollars from the European Union, that of which is the demand curve. So this is the free market or the free floating system. We have a pegged system, and then we have a fixed system. Okay, so there's some disadvantage of having a fixed exchange rate. So once again, there's disadvantages and advantages to all three systems. The disadvantage to a free floating exchange rate is that it could be a lot more volatile, and also it may be decreases the ability for or confidence that people have within the currency if it is a really small country. A managed exchange rate has the pro of being a lot more stable than a fixed exchange rate, but however it has but then a free floating exchange rate, however, it has the con that the central bank has to intervene a lot, which can be costly and can cause a lot of problems for the central bank. And a pegged exchange rate basically means that the government has to constantly intervene in the market to ensure that the value of the currencies are equal to another, and then so advantage of fixed, there's advantages and disadvantages of all these systems. balance of payments. The balance of payment accounts.
The balance of payment accounts.
Okay. I have made videos concerning this. You guys can go watch the videos. They're also in my channel. Yes.
They're also in my channel. Yes.
Okay, economic integration. There are six stages of economic integration. The first one is trading bloc, which is like a free trade zone. For a prime example of the North American Free Trade Agreement, where Canada, America, and Mexico decides to abolish all trade restrictions between the countries in order to ensure that promote trade within the countries. So that's the first level. Okay. Free trade area. Okay, no wait, that's the first level. The first level is the trading bloc, which is a preferential trade area, trading bloc that gives preferential access to certain products from certain countries. This can be reducing but not eliminating tariffs. Free trade area is when they eliminate tariffs. A custom union is when not only do they eliminate tariffs between themselves, they also have a common tariff or common external barriers between trades to other countries that are not within the custom union. A common market is when capital, land, capital, and labor is freely allowed to flow between the countries. For example, workers in one country can go work in another country. Investment from one country can freely move to another country and then invest in the other country. Economic and monetary union is when they use the same currency. For example, the European Union is an example of an economically integrated union. And lastly, we have complete economic integration. This is an example of the United States. For example, each state may have varying taxation policies. However, they are all basically the same. They're basically the same country, and they're basically all integrated together with one another. Yes. So this shows how integrated countries may be. In terms of trade, I have also made a video about that. Basically, it states the relationship between the exports and the imports. A positive in terms of trade indicates a healthy export to import ratio, while a decrease in terms of trade indicates a non-healthy trade relationship. Now, let's move into development economics. Economic development doesn't just refer to economic growth. It also refers to development in the Human Development Index, because development is not just about economic growth. It is also about, for example, living standards, education, access to medicine, life expectancy, and so on and so on. Therefore, however, there's a high correlation between economic growth and economic development. Usually, high economic growth countries are having high economic development. Measuring development, once again, there is not only the GDP, but there are also the purchasing power parity. $1 could go a long way. For example, in India, however, it may not go a long way in Hong Kong, because the prices of goods are really different. Therefore, the purchasing power of $1 is very different between different countries. So measuring development, once again, there could be poverty. There could be not only is there GDP, gross domestic product. There's also GNI, gross national income, and there's also the Human Development Index, the HDI, for different countries, that of which will show how developed the country is, how well the country has developed, and whatnot. Yes. So development economics, I really believe, is the hardest. It's basically more like application of economic ideas, domestic factors and economic development. Yeah. Income distribution. International trade and economic development. So once again, international trade, international investment will benefit economic development in the sense that economic development will be trade liberalization. These will benefit. Okay, for example, if one country is suffering from non-economic investment, then liquidity injection of foreign direct investment will be able to help. So there are foreign direct investment, there are multinational corporations, there are foreign direct investments, there are foreign direct investment in developing countries. And these are all maybe beneficial, maybe neutral, maybe even harmful to the countries in which they're based in. And lastly, we have, what is it called? Aid, debt, and economic development. Yeah. these are really just applications of economic ideas, and I don't think it's really that important. Last, we have the balance between markets and intervention, and that pretty much concludes this entire syllabus. So I have gone over in almost 2 hours of the entire syllabus of the IBTP Economics in 2 years course. My previous videos have gone over all of these topics, and I do hope this video has been at least of a little bit help in reviewing the major topics before you just walk into the IB economic exam. So I do hope my videos have been helpful, and I hope to see you guys in the next time. We will be going into something more interesting, the CFA Level 1 program curriculum, something I've been hyping up, and I think it's the most logical step for me to take after me finishing the IB curriculum. Of course, I'll give some examination advice for paper 1, paper 2, and paper 3 for HL students. And after that, I will be going into a reading of the CFA Level 1 program curriculum, and also I'll be going into lectures of the CFA curriculum. So I do hope my videos have been helpful, and subscribe and keep tuned to see what's going to happen next. Goodbye.